The morning sun cast long shadows across the palace courtyard, as Camilla, Queen Consort of England, stood frozen at her bedroom window. Her hands trembled as she held the official document that would change everything. The royal seal at the bottom made it undeniably real. King Charles had made his decision, and there was no going back. The trouble had been brewing for months, though most of the public remained unaware of the growing tension within the royal household. It all started when Camilla's younger brother, Mark Shand, had become involved in a series of questionable business dealings that threatened to embarrass the crown. What made matters worse was that her sister, Annabel Elliot, had been secretly meeting with tabloid journalists, sharing intimate details about life inside the palace walls. Charles had tried to handle the situation quietly at first. He arranged private meetings with both siblings, hoping to resolve the issues without public scandal. But Mark's gambling debts had spiraled out of control, and he had started using his royal connections to secure loans he could never repay. Meanwhile, Annabel's loose tongue had already resulted in several embarrassing stories appearing in the press, each one more damaging than the last. The final straw came when palace security discovered that Mark had been photographed at an illegal gambling den, surrounded by known criminals. The pictures were grainy, but his identity was unmistakable. Intelligence services warned that these associations could compromise the security of the entire royal family. Foreign adversaries were already showing interest in Mark's vulnerabilities, seeing him as a potential asset for gathering information about the monarchy's private affairs. Camilla had pleaded with her husband during their heated discussions in the private study. She explained that her family meant everything to her, that they had supported her through the difficult years when the public still remembered Diana with such devotion. Her voice had cracked as she reminded Charles how her children, Tom and Laura, had stood by her side when others turned away. But Charles remained unmoved, his duty to the crown taking precedence over personal loyalties. The king's advisors had been unanimous in their recommendation. Sir Edward Young, the private secretary, had presented a detailed report outlining the risks. The cabinet secretary had warned of potential constitutional implications. Even the Archbishop of Canterbury had suggested that decisive action was necessary to protect the institution of the monarchy. They all agreed that Camilla's extended family had become a liability that could no longer be tolerated. As Camilla read through the document again, each word felt like a dagger to her heart. The language was formal and cold, typical of royal proclamations. But the message was devastatingly clear. Her brother Mark was permanently banned from all royal residences and events. Her sister Annabel would lose her interior design contracts with the royal estate. Most painfully, her children, Tom and Laura, would be stripped of their informal royal privileges and asked to maintain distance from official royal functions. The Queen Consort's hands shook as she realized the full implications of Charles's decision. Her family would essentially be exiled from the life she had built over decades. The people who had stood by her through scandal and controversy were now being cast aside to protect the very institution that had initially rejected her. The irony was not lost on her. She, who had once been considered an outsider, was now being forced to abandon those closest to her to maintain her position inside the royal circle. Charles had not even delivered the news personally. Instead, he had instructed his private secretary to hand her the sealed envelope during breakfast. The cowardice of this approach stung almost as much as the decision itself. After years of marriage, after supporting him through his mother's death and his coronation, he could not even look her in the eye as he destroyed her family relationships. The document detailed a comprehensive plan for severing ties. Security clearances would be revoked immediately. Staff members associated with her family would be reassigned or dismissed. Financial support that had been quietly provided to her relatives would cease within 30 days. Even her personal correspondence would be monitored to ensure she maintained no unauthorized contact with the banned family members. Camilla understood the political calculation behind Charles's decision, but understanding did not make acceptance any easier. The monarchy had survived for over 1,000 years by making difficult choices, often sacrificing personal happiness for institutional stability. She had witnessed this harsh reality throughout her relationship with Charles, but she had never imagined it would eventually target her own loved ones. The Queen Consort thought back to happier times when her family had felt genuinely welcomed into royal circles. She remembered Mark's pride when he was first invited to state dinners, how he would spend hours preparing his formal attire and practicing proper protocol. Annabelle had been thrilled to contribute her design expertise to several royal residences, seeing it as validation of her professional skills and royal acceptance. Her children had grown up navigating the complex world of royal associations with grace and discretion. Tom had built a successful career while maintaining appropriate distance from royal duties. Laura had raised her family away from public scrutiny while still supporting her mother during important ceremonies. Neither had ever sought to exploit their connection to the crown for personal gain, but none of that mattered now. The decision had been made, and Charles expected her complete compliance. The document made it clear that any attempt to circumvent these restrictions would result in severe consequences, potentially including her own removal from royal duties. The threat was subtle but unmistakable. She could choose her family or her crown, but not both. As morning turned to afternoon, Camilla remained in her chambers, unable to face the routine of royal obligations. Her private secretary knocked repeatedly, reminding her of scheduled appointments and waiting dignitaries. But how could she smile and make polite conversation when her world was collapsing around her? How could she represent the crown with dignity when that same crown was tearing her family apart? The weight of her isolation became increasingly apparent as the hours passed. She realized that she had no one to confide in, no one who could truly understand the impossible position she faced. Charles had made his choice clear, and discussing it further would only create more tension. Her staff were loyal to the crown first and to her second. Even her closest friends moved in circles where royal favor could be withdrawn at any moment. Evening approached, and still she had not emerged from her private quarters. The palace staff grew concerned, whispering among themselves about the queen consort's unusual absence from her scheduled duties. Some suspected illness, others wondered if she was dealing with a family crisis. None could have imagined the true nature of her distress or the devastating choice that had been forced upon her. The next morning brought no relief to Camilla's torment. She had barely slept, spending most of the night staring at the ceiling, while memories of her family flooded her mind. The palace felt different now, cold and unwelcoming, despite its familiar grandeur. Every corridor seemed to echo with the weight of Charles's decision. Every room a reminder of what she was about to lose. Her first obligation was a morning meeting with the foreign secretary about an upcoming state visit. Camilla forced herself to dress appropriately, applying makeup to hide the dark circles under her eyes and the puffiness from hours of crying. She practiced her public smile in the mirror, but even to herself, it looked hollow and unconvincing. The mask of royal composure felt heavier than ever before. During the briefing, her mind wandered constantly. The foreign secretary discussed diplomatic protocols and ceremonial details, but Camilla found herself thinking about her brother Mark's laugh, the way he used to tell stories that made everyone around him smile. She remembered Annabelle's excitement when she first toured Clarence's house, pointing out architectural details and suggesting subtle improvements that would enhance the building's character. The meeting concluded with the foreign secretary expressing concern about her apparent distraction. Camilla apologized, claiming fatigue from recent travel, but she could see doubt in his eyes. News of royal difficulties spread quickly through government circles, and she knew that speculation about her state of mind would soon reach the press if she could not regain her composure. Her next appointment was with representatives from one of her charitable organizations, a foundation supporting literacy programs in rural communities. These meetings usually energized her, providing connection to meaningful work beyond ceremonial duties. But today, even discussing children's education felt impossible when her own family was being torn apart. The representatives noticed her distraction immediately, exchanging worried glances as she struggled to focus on their presentation. Halfway through the meeting, Camilla excused herself, claiming sudden illness. She rushed to the nearest private bathroom and locked the door behind her, finally allowing herself to break down completely. The sobs came in waves, years of suppressed emotion pouring out as she realized the full extent of her isolation. She was trapped between loyalty to her family and duty to the crown, with no path that would preserve both. When she finally composed herself enough to return, her staff had rescheduled the remaining appointments. Word of her illness had already reached Charles, who sent his private secretary to check on her condition. But Camilla knew this was not genuine concern. It was institutional protection. The monarchy could not afford to have the queen consort appear unstable or unreliable, especially not when controversial decisions were being implemented. That afternoon, she received a phone call that made everything worse. Her daughter Laura was crying, having just been informed by palace security that her children would no longer be welcome at royal family gatherings. The children had been looking forward to attending their grandfather's upcoming birthday celebration, and Laura struggled to explain why they were suddenly excluded. The pain in her daughter's voice cut through Camilla like a knife. Tom called an hour later, his voice tight with controlled anger. He had received official notice that his consulting firm would lose its contracts with royal estates, despite years of excellent service and fair dealing. The financial impact would be significant, but the public humiliation would be worse. Business associates would wonder what he had done wrong, and competitors would whisper about his fall from royal favor. Camilla wanted desperately to comfort her children, to explain that she was fighting for them. But the monitoring restrictions made honest conversation impossible. She could only offer vague reassurances while her heart broke listening to their confusion and hurt. They had always been careful to maintain appropriate boundaries, never exploiting their royal connections, but their discretion and loyalty meant nothing now. Evening brought the most difficult challenge yet. Charles appeared in her sitting room for their customary pre-dinner conversation, acting as if nothing had changed between them. He discussed the day's schedule and upcoming events with casual normalcy, while Camilla struggled to respond appropriately. The distance between them felt vast despite their physical proximity. When she finally found the courage to bring up the family situation, Charles's expression hardened immediately. He reminded her that the decision was final, and that dwelling on it would only create additional problems. His tone was not cruel, but it was absolutely firm. He spoke about duty and sacrifice, about the greater good that sometimes required personal loss. Each word felt like another nail in the coffin of their relationship. Camilla tried to explain how the decision was affecting her children, how unfair it seemed to punish them for her siblings' mistakes. But Charles cut her off, stating that association with the crown carried responsibilities that her family had failed to meet. He suggested that perhaps this separation would ultimately benefit everyone by removing temptation and reducing security risks. The conversation ended with Charles reminding her about the next day's public engagements. He expected her to fulfill her duties with the same professionalism she had always shown. The monarchy depended on continuity and stability, regardless of personal difficulties. As he left her sitting room, Camilla felt more alone than she had ever felt in her life. Later that night, she walked through the palace corridors, trying to find some sense of peace or resolution. The portraits of previous royal families seemed to watch her with knowing eyes, as if they understood the price of crown and duty. She wondered how many other royal consorts had faced similar impossible choices. How many had sacrificed family relationships to maintain institutional stability. In the portrait gallery, she paused before a painting of Queen Alexandra, wife of King Edward VII. Alexandra had endured her husband's numerous affairs with dignity and grace, always maintaining her public composure, despite private heartbreak. Camilla wondered if Alexandra had ever felt this hollow, this disconnected from everything that had once brought her joy. As she continued walking, palace guards acknowledged her with respectful nods, but she could see questions in their eyes. Word of her distress was spreading throughout the royal household, creating concern about stability and continuity. These men had sworn to protect the royal family. But what happened when the threat came from within? When duty itself became destructive, the weight of expectations pressed down on her with increasing force. Tomorrow would bring more public appearances, more smiles and gracious words, more pretending that everything was normal while her world continued to collapse. The irony struck her again. She had fought so hard to be accepted as a legitimate part of the royal family, only to discover that acceptance required abandoning the people who had supported her through that fight. Standing at a window overlooking the palace gardens, Camilla made a decision that would change everything. She could not continue pretending that Charles's ultimatum was acceptable. She could not abandon her family without a fight, regardless of the consequences. The crown had taken enough from her over the years. It would not take her children and siblings without a struggle. But she also knew that direct confrontation would be futile. Charles had the support of his advisors, the government, and the institution itself. If she wanted to protect her family, she would need to find another way. A more dramatic gesture that would force everyone to confront the human cost of their calculated decisions. The plan that began forming in her mind was desperate and risky, but it seemed like her only remaining option. As midnight approached, the Queen Consort began preparing for what might be her final act of defiance. She wrote letters to her children, expressing her love and explaining her choices. She gathered personal items that held special meaning, photographs and mementos that connected her to happier times. If she was going to make a stand, she would do it completely, leaving no doubt about her priorities or her pain. Dawn broke gray and misty over Buckingham Palace as Camilla put her desperate plan into action. She had spent the remaining hours of night writing careful instructions for her staff and arranging her personal affairs. The letters to her children were sealed and placed where they would be found quickly. Her jewelry, except for pieces with historical significance, was organized for return to the Crown collection. She was preparing for exile, voluntary or otherwise. At 7 in the morning, she dismissed her personal protection officer, claiming she needed private time in the palace gardens for reflection. The guard hesitated, as this violated standard security protocols, but the Queen Consort's tone left no room for argument. She walked slowly toward the main palace entrance, carrying only a small handbag containing her most treasured family photographs. The duty guards at the palace gates recognized her immediately, snapping to attention despite their confusion about her unusual appearance. Camilla wore a simple black dress instead of her typical formal attire, and her face showed clear signs of emotional distress. Her eyes were red from crying, her usually perfect hair slightly disheveled from a sleepless night of anguish. Without warning or explanation, she positioned herself directly in front of the ornate palace gates. The morning shift change was just beginning, with fresh guards arriving to replace the night watch. Tourist photographers were already gathering across the street, hoping to capture images of arriving dignitaries or royal family members. None expected to witness what was about to unfold. Camilla began speaking in a voice loud enough to carry to the gathering crowd, her words carefully chosen, but heavy with emotion. She talked about family loyalty and the price of royal duty, about impossible choices between love and obligation. The guards stood frozen, uncertain how to respond to such an unprecedented situation. They had been trained to protect the royal family from external threats, not to manage a public breakdown by the Queen Consort herself. As her voice rose, more people began to gather. Early morning commuters stopped to listen, pulling out phones to record the extraordinary scene. News photographers arrived within minutes, alerted by social media posts about something unusual happening at the palace. Camilla's words became more personal, more raw, as she described the pain of being forced to choose between her crown and her children. The guards grew increasingly uncomfortable as the crowd swelled and media attention intensified. Their training emphasized discretion and protection of royal privacy, but their primary concern was preventing any situation that might endanger royal family members. The duty sergeant attempted to approach Camilla respectfully, suggesting she return inside where palace officials could assist with whatever difficulties she was experiencing. But Camilla refused to move. She continued speaking about the cost of royal life, the way duty could corrupt love and turn family members against each other. Her words carried the weight of decades of struggle for acceptance, years of maintaining dignity while facing public criticism, and now the final betrayal of being forced to abandon those who had supported her through everything. The scene became more dramatic as palace officials began arriving. The private secretary appeared first, his face pale with shock and concern about the publicity implications. He spoke urgently into his phone, undoubtedly briefing senior advisors and potentially the king himself about the unfolding crisis. This was exactly the kind of public scandal the monarchy worked constantly to avoid. Charles's equerry arrived next, attempting to convince Camilla to discuss her concerns in private, rather than before an increasingly large audience of onlookers and journalists. But she had passed the point of caring about protocol or public relations. The decision to banish her family had broken something fundamental in her relationship with the crown, and she was no longer willing to suffer in silence. Her breakdown intensified as she spoke about her brother Mark, remembering his kindness during her difficult divorce years, his steady support when the press was most cruel. She talked about Annabelle's loyalty, how her sister had defended her against critics even when it would have been easier to stay silent. The pain of losing these relationships cut so deep that royal dignity seemed meaningless in comparison. The crowd grew increasingly sympathetic as they witnessed genuine human suffering rather than the usual carefully managed royal appearances. Many people in the gathering crowd had their own family struggles, their own experiences of impossible choices between competing loyalties. Camilla's raw emotion connected with them in ways that formal royal ceremonies never could. Security became a growing concern as the crowd pressed closer to the palace gates. The guards found themselves in an impossible position, needing to protect the queen consort while also managing an increasingly chaotic public situation. Additional security personnel arrived, but their presence only attracted more attention and speculation about the severity of the crisis. Charles finally appeared, his face grim with determination and barely controlled anger. He approached Camilla slowly, speaking in low tones that could not be heard by the crowd or media. Their conversation was brief but intense, with Camilla shaking her head repeatedly as Charles gestured toward the palace. The visual of their disagreement, played out before hundreds of witnesses, created exactly the kind of public royal discord that the monarchy had spent centuries trying to avoid. When Charles reached out to take her arm, Camilla pulled away dramatically, raising her voice again to declare that she would not be silenced or managed like a public relations problem. She stated clearly that her family's banishment was unacceptable, that royal duty should not require destroying the relationships that had sustained her through decades of public scrutiny. The crowd murmured approval, sensing they were witnessing a rare moment of royal authenticity. The situation escalated further when Tom and Laura arrived. Having been contacted by palace staff about their mother's public distress, their appearance added another layer of complexity, as security had to balance protecting all family members while managing an increasingly volatile situation. The children's obvious concern for their mother, combined with their own anger about their banishment, created additional emotional intensity. Camilla's breakdown reached its peak when she collapsed against the palace gates, her composure finally shattered completely. The image of the queen consort sobbing while clinging to the barriers of her own home created powerful symbolism that would resonate far beyond that morning. The guards moved to assist her, but their help came too late to prevent the scene from being captured and broadcast worldwide. The aftermath began immediately as palace officials worked to manage the crisis. Camilla was escorted inside while her children followed, their faces showing a mixture of concern and defiance. Charles remained briefly to speak with security commanders before disappearing into the palace, leaving journalists and onlookers to speculate about the implications of what they had witnessed. Within hours, the footage was trending globally, with royal experts and commentators offering various interpretations of the dramatic scene. Some praised Camilla's authentic emotion and defense of family loyalty. Others criticized her breach of royal protocol and questioned her fitness for the role of queen consort. The monarchy faced its most serious public relations challenge in years, all stemming from a private family decision that had exploded into public view. The crisis forced Charles to confront the human cost of his institutional decision. The image of his wife breaking down in public while defending her family created pressure that no amount of advisory consultation could resolve. He faced a choice between maintaining his position and potentially losing his marriage, or finding some compromise that could preserve both institutional integrity and family relationships. The resolution, when it came, required careful negotiation and face-saving measures for all parties involved. Charles ultimately agreed to modify the banishment, allowing supervised family contact while maintaining security restrictions. Camilla's public breakdown had achieved what private pleading could not, forcing the monarchy to acknowledge that some prices were too high to pay, even for institutional stability. The incident became a turning point in their relationship and in public perceptions of the royal family. Camilla's willingness to sacrifice her royal dignity for family loyalty earned her unexpected respect from those who had previously questioned her worthiness. The monarchy learned that even the most calculated institutional decisions could have unpredictable human consequences that no amount of protocol could control.